but I had no idea what the terrain was like. I didn't know the route. I didn't know the terrain. I didn't know what it would be like to ride those number of miles in consecutive days. It's so different, the consecutive days factor versus the leisurely, whenever you want to do 50 today, 30 in a week, 100 in 2 weeks.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to be speaking with today's guest Kimberly, who runs the Gal on the Go blog and bi-weekly podcast, in addition to being the owner of a successful outdoor yoga flow business in Virginia. Kimberly has taken an open mind to life's adventures, and her personal fitness journey has evolved as a result. In 2021, she participated in the Empire State Ride, a week-long endurance cycling event entailing riding almost 900 kilometres in just 7 days across the state of New York. I'm excited to be speaking with Kimberly today and to explore more about how choosing to say yes to a spirit of adventure has shaped her into the person she is now. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Hi Bella, thank you so much. I'm very grateful to be invited onto your show today.
Yay! So, Kimberly, I always like to start my show by asking the guests the same question as an introduction, and that is, can you please describe the first bike that you ever owned?
Okay, so I've thought about this before, and I really wish at that time in my life I was in tune enough to know I'm really going to want to know this years from now because it's such a passion for me. I believe it was a Schwinn. Might have been a Pixie model. It was red, white, and blue. I remember that for sure. It had a regular seat, not one of those banana seats, and it had like metallic-y streamers coming out of the handlebars.
Oh, great. And do you remember that feeling of like exhilaration or when you first started riding it?
Oh yeah, I remember the training wheels and like the massive cracks in the sidewalk that seemed like boulders but were probably nothing really. And I remember when the training wheels came off, and oddly enough, the first time I fell off my bike, and then, you know, getting back on and just like that sense of that I didn't even know what freedom was necessarily at that age. I had to be all of like 6 or 7, but I felt freedom for the first time in life.
Personally, I feel that feeling of freedom, however we want to phrase it, when we first learn to ride a bike, if we keep on continuing or rediscover cycling as an adult, I feel that that's a bit of the puzzle that comes back within us that we may have lost. And it's hard for me to describe, but that sense of freedom is something that definitely resonates for me as well.
I love it.
So, Kimberly, I'd like to take the opportunity to explore a bit of your background in sports. Have you always been a sporty person?
You know, it's funny because I, for years, spent, my time saying no, right? I was like, oh, I'm not sporty, because I think I was always thinking in terms of like competitive sports, singularly. And then when I reflected on it more, I was like, you know what? No, I guess I was sporty because, when I was little, I took swim lessons. I'd ride my bicycle all over the place within the parameters, of course, of what I was allowed to, where I was allowed to go. I had a metal rickety jungle gym set, and I was like a monkey playing on it all the time. Tennis, volleyball. So I was like, yeah, I guess I was active as a child and just didn't even realize it.
It's funny how, because I've come across this with other people before, and it's almost like we have a perception of sports and athletics and competitiveness, and there's a line that we cross where what we do and what we enjoy in being active, we don't necessarily resonate with ourselves being a participant in a sporty sort of way. That sort of sounds like what you were describing there.
Yeah, and you know what? I grew up an only child, so I think I was so used to like entertaining myself and doing things that were physical, but like solo physical, that's why I might have not ever thought of it, as I was sporty.
Were you part of any sporting teams or anything from a school point of view?
Well, I would say like the closest to being part of something earlier than high school was like, those rec leagues. Like I was an Amherst ponytail softball player, but that was like, a recreational league. It wasn't until high school really that I was part of like any kind of, let's say, more formal team sports.
So then, moving away from school sports to your adult life, how did, I guess, that active sort of lifestyle come into play with yourself, and what sort of things were you seeking out to participate in?
Well, I learned about myself that I get bored easily. So I love being active, but like I'm almost like a true Gemini in that indecisiveness. So like I'll try one thing, focus on it for a while, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm antsy. I want to try something else. So, I've gone through the phases of like HIIT classes, boot camps, running, cycling classes, yoga. I love mixing things up and trying and seeing if I actually enjoy whatever it is, and either keeping it up but weaving it through the years, or letting it go because it's not what, I expected, or for whatever reason.
Yeah, some of the things you participated in, I think you participated in a few grueling sort of Spartan type challenges before, haven't you? Can you describe those to us a little bit?
Sure. So I grew up like a chubby kid, and I was always called like roly poly. And so I was active, but like, again, not what you would consider an athlete per se. I went through a divorce, and I was like, it's time for me to put me first. And I wanted to change my body. Like, I just didn't feel well physically, mentally, So I had heard of Spartans, and through this one like rec center called Freedom Center, I met a group of people, and we all started training together to do Spartans. I did my first one and was totally addicted to it. I was like, what? This is so cool. Like, I mean, it kicked my butt, trust me. Like, but something about that butt kicking, I just loved. And like, I think the whole adult playing in a mountain, was also like so fun to me. And then I focused on it, and I was like, you know what? I heard of a trifecta. And at the time, that was, doing 3 of the different level Spartans within 1 calendar year. And I was like, okay, that's my goal. And I didn't want to just like do them, because of course, when you're challenging yourself, you're like, which one's the hardest one of the first one, the second, and the third? So I trained as best I could, did all sorts of things. Like I would go on hikes. I'm a big believer in cross training for things that like just because you're doing something like doesn't mean you train in that thing. Like if I'm doing a cycling event, I just don't cycle to train. Like there's benefits of, the cross training so much more. So, I would do hikes, runs, power walks, like, strength training. Did my first one, got through it, did the second one, got through it, did the third. And oddly enough, I didn't do them in order of difficulty. I did the easiest one, then the hardest one because of the timing, then the second hardest one. Now, you would think like, that's not the way to do it. Like,
and no building yourself up there. How long do they go for?
It's about, depending on which one it is, it's 5 to 8 hours of the day. So that's a good chunk of physical activity, because you're not like, you're of course pausing, some moments and hydrating, but you're really not stopping until you reach the end. So it turned out to be for the best, because that second to hardest one at the end felt so much more, I think, enjoyable than it would have been, because I already did the hardest, right? So like mentally and physically, I was like, okay, I've got this, and what a fun way to go out,
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to draw on to that experience of I've been through harder, so of course I can do this now.
Yeah, it really helped me mentally, especially like there's some things, of course, you excel at and you're going to in an event, and there's some things are going to be a challenge for you, and it helps in any way you can to like, squash those ones that, are going to be really hard.
I've not participated in Spartan challenges. I know people who have, and I've been past events in Australia when they've been run and seen like what would the right word be? The enthusiasm? In Australia, we'd probably say the vibe. Just the feel and the energy from those people. So you can tell that the participants are going through something that's absolutely grueling. It's taking all of their physical capacity, but there just seems to be this energy that comes from doing it as well. Did you find that?
Absolutely. It was pretty wild because I trained for them with friends, but I participated in them singularly. So, like, when I went to do the trifecta, and I kind of did that so that, like, I wouldn't feel the pressure of having to, like, keep up with someone or the pressure actually of holding someone back. Like, I didn't want that guilt. So I did them solo, and then I was like, oh, crap, like, what am I going to do in certain situations that I might get stuck? And it was the first time in life, and it was like an amazing aha moment because, like, let's say I literally hit a wall, okay, which had happened, and I was like, oh my God, like, I just am trying my best. I can't get over this wall. Well, I feel this, like, push, and it was like one of the guys in the Spartan was just like giving me that push to like get me enough to like grab on to the top and get myself over. And I was just like blown away by the kindness and like the support. I'm like, with that event, it is timed. It is kind of more of a competition thing for some than a fun thing. It depends why you went into it, right? So for him to do that when he's focused on his own goals and his own like path in that competition just really blew my mind and meant a lot to me. And I was like, okay, I've got this because I'm surrounded by strangers who are so kind and cool that I'm not as alone as I think I am.
Wow, so it was sort of like a solidarity across your other, competitors, and not necessarily, as you were saying there, you're not necessarily competing against them. People have got their own motivations to sign up, and whether it's to come a top 10 or to challenge yourself just to finish, everyone's motives are different. But what you're saying there is you felt that energy and solidarity through the people around you to keep on pushing through to the end.
Absolutely. It was like comforting. It was like inspiring. It was an incredible moment.
Speaking of inspiration, Kimberly, you were selected to be a US ambassador during the Winter Olympic Games. And you actually were an ambassador at 2 of the games, and one was for the Paralympics and then the other was the Winter Olympics. That's correct?
Correct. You got it.
But your experience as an ambassador specifically for the Winter Olympic Paralympic Games, that was really a bit of a transformative experience for you as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. I grew up watching the Winter Olympics because, of course, growing up in Buffalo, winter sports, huge deal. And it was just very typical at the time I was growing up for the Winter and Summer Games on television to be something that you watched, like, in awe, and you knew, like, all the athletes. And so I was really intrigued and excited to be part of the Olympics, but I had never known about the Paralympics till I was assigned to them. And I didn't quite have a full understanding of what they were. And, in all honesty, I went into it like I was like, okay, I'm super honored, of course, and excited to be doing it. But I was like, too bad I didn't get the Olympics at the time. And by the time I came out of the Paralympics, I was like, this was the coolest, biggest blessing ever because I learned so many life lessons. It was unbelievable. I met so many incredible people that you want to talk about inspiring. I mean, you're getting inspired on a constant basis every single day. And it was truly, like, I've heard life-changing before, and I was like, yeah, I thought something was life-changing, but no, that was genuinely life-changing. People want to be seen for them as the people they are. They don't want to be seen for the disability they have, and that in itself is just incredible. And, to say like, oh, I can't do such and such today, like, oh, you grow up, you hear these things like, oh, the slope is too icy today, or this or that. And then you have like a blind alpine skier, okay, doing the run with no choice because they've been training for that moment, their whole life. And you're like, really? I'm going to be a baby and like complain or think about this condition or that condition on the slopes when this person's like boldly, fearlessly tackling their dream with a disadvantage at that. It's hard not to be affected.
I can only imagine it would definitely be one of those moments that would reshape and reframe your perception of what's possible for yourself as well. And Kimberly, I know like your nickname, your tagline, for lack of a better word, is Girl on the Go, and you're known for saying yes to things and to seeking out new adventures and saying yes and seeing what's possible. I wonder, is this something that perhaps triggered that for you?
Yeah, so I always did adventures, like, because again, just like I love trying different things, and I feel like in life, unless you try something at least once, you're never going to find out what you truly are passionate about. Like, you could think you have a passion for something, like, I love cycling, that's my passion. But unless you try something else, like, you're not going to know if that could be equally, if not more, of a passion. So I started to do, like at least one of everything and try not to repeat, kind of for financial reasons and, time away from work reasons. And I was getting these reactions to my blog post. I would put still photos because you didn't do video at the time, and I'd write as descriptive as possible. And people would be like, oh my God, I so want to do that. Like, I'm going to that area. I didn't know that existed. I'm going to do that when I get there. Or, they'd be like, oh, you did that. I can do that. Now, and it really affected me the way like the Paralympic athletes affected me. And I was like, okay, I love inspiring people. That encouraged me to keep it going. And like Gal on the Go was born out of that. And then Gal on the Go became the podcast and just elevated to a different medium.
Yeah, and you were sort of saying how it all started with a few photos on a blog, and it takes me back to, and I specifically think about it in terms of some women participation in sport, and it's sort of, you can't be what you can't see. So if you can start seeing that something's possible, then you can start believing that it's possible for you as well. So in your own little way, you started inspiring people just by showing them, I'm going to say yes to doing something out of my comfort zone, and this is how it's gone. So it shows you what's possible from that perspective.
Yeah, and I really take that seriously in terms of, I was a generation growing up where there weren't many women to look up to in an active lifestyle. That just wasn't the way it was. There were tons of male role models for boys and men, but not really many for women. So if I could be like a small nugget of that, I'm not a high profile person, but as a regular everyday gal, if it resonates with you, what I'm doing, that just fills my heart and soul, because I think we need more of that, where women uplift each other instead of picking each other apart or just turning to a negative side. We need to just encourage each other.
Oh, it totally resonates with me. And the more women that can say yes and see what's possible and start doing, I think the bigger the rolling stone that will gather the momentum to being more and more. And I really hope and feel that as society, certainly in my culture, that things are starting to become on a precipice there, and we'll start seeing more and more amazing female athletes inspire us from all walks of life, from every type of means as well.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I think it's limitless for the next generation, quite honestly.
Here's hoping. We need that shift. We've waited so long for it. I'm like yourself, Kimberly. I also grew up with just, even the concept that there could be a female version of a competitive type of sport was just so foreign to me. And for all my listeners out there, I'm not actually that old. I may have just started the decade that begins with the number 4, but, I'm still pretty young, I think. It wasn't that long ago. The 80s and 90s are still vivid in my memory. So, Kimberly, through this attitude of saying yes to a venture, you found yourself signing up for a long-distance endurance cycling event called the Empire State Ride. Is that correct?
You got it, yep.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So the Empire State Ride is a ride that's hosted by Roswell Cancer Institute, and it's a 500 plus mile ride across the state of New York from Staten Island to Niagara Falls. And all the money that you raise, there's a minimum, it's a fully supported ride, and the minimum is $3,000, and all that you raise goes to Roswell Cancer Research. And that was appealing to me in itself because the research is for the benefit worldwide. So it just happens to be in my hometown of Buffalo that Roswell Institute is located in, but the benefits of what they're doing and the strides that they're making is for cancer worldwide. And I had a friend, Beth, who lost her life to breast cancer, and she was originally who I had signed up to do the Empire State Ride for. Then, COVID hit and it became a virtual ride. And
So a virtual ride, were they asking competitors to start doing this virtually online, like on indoor trainers, or how was that going to work? Because there's a vast difference between cycling indoors and a different type of physicality to cycling indoors on a static trainer as opposed to actually, traversing the entire state.
Yeah, so they handled that in terms of you had 1 month to complete 500 plus miles, like the minimum of the 500. And it was great because, I went into it incredibly intimidated. It was like 500 plus miles. I had never done endurance riding, especially consecutively days in a row in my entire life. So you had a month to do it, and I kind of was like a little bit lazy and let the intimidation factor get the best of me. So I leisurely got my miles in over the month's time. I made it, but I wasn't exactly and I was proud of the funds I raised, of course, and stuff, but I wasn't proud of myself because I consider myself way more driven than taking the easy option of something. So when we got out of the peak of COVID, ESR came up again, and they allowed you, because of the fact that the first time that 1 year was virtual, you can apply your fundraising to doing it in person when it returned to in person. And that was a game changer. I was doing it at that point for again, my friend and members of the community. It was amazing when people find out that you're doing this type of ride. I was very privileged to hear all these shared stories, and it blew my mind how many people were battling cancer or who had lost key people in their lives to cancer. And after getting through the 2021 ESR, the in-person one, I thought, okay, that experience, kind of like a one and done, right? I gave it all I got and successfully did it in terms of my personal terms of what success would be for that ride. And then in March of 2022, my cousin David, who is just a couple years older than me, and he was like a brother to me, he got pancreatic cancer and died within days of getting pancreatic cancer. Now, obviously, it had to have been misdiagnosed earlier, but that ticked me off so badly, losing him, the way we lost him, everything, that I signed up for ESR, and I was like, that's it, I'm doing it. And I did it in 2022 on behalf of him and on behalf of his sister, his survivor.
I'm so sorry to hear about his passing and potential misdiagnosis. And yeah, I feel that for you. Then you had a very, very close personal reason to motivate yourself to line up again. I mean, that changes how you approach an event as well.
Oh, absolutely. Because, first of all, you're doing it. I was doing it for my friend, right? And people in the community. And there's a drive to that, right? That fuels you. But when it gets as close as it did with my cousin David, and your feelings change and intensify, it truly is almost like a whole different level, different experience. And I never thought I'd be back in that spot, or worse, in that spot of the why behind it.
If I actually just take the step backwards there, you were saying when you signed up for the event initially, and obviously then unfortunately COVID happened and shut the world down and shut events down for quite some time, and the event went virtual, so you were given a month to complete this challenge which you'd signed up to do in real life outdoors in 7 days. But you mentioned there, Kimberly, that you hadn't done that distance before and it was still a bit boggling to, it was good to be able to have a goal to work towards for that month. What sort of distances were you riding prior to that? What did your cycling look like at that stage?
So before I did the virtual, I was just riding recreationally, right? Like point A to B, basically to run errands on the weekends, kind of just to get on the bike and decompress. I think at the time, at most I had done maybe 25, 50 miles, if that, as far as like the longest rides I had ever done.
Wow. So for those of our listeners who are in metric, I think if Bella's mathematical brain calculations goes correct, that's probably around 40 to 80 kilometers maybe.
I will trust that because I do not know the conversion.
No, that's fine. No. That's totally fine. But just to put it in context, there's a vast difference from doing those daily distances to then signing up for this challenge, which again, if we go into metric, is just under 900 kilometers.
Yeah, and I was a fish out of water. So, like, I didn't train properly at all. And again, ESR is not a race, right? It's an event. The goal is to raise money and awareness for cancer. And if you add more to that goal, that's on you. Like if you want to make it a timed thing, if you, whatever you want to do, that's a personal thing. And I had just originally wanted to do it out of the research aspect of it and just finish it. Like I was like, if I finish this, like, okay, I'm going to be like, so proud of myself.
And you should be.
Oh, thank you. But naively, or for whatever, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I didn't train properly. I didn't even know how to tackle training for something like that. And that's why I was kind of like, okay, this is a blessing that first time when it was virtual. Because I was like, So when it came time to do the in-person one that next year, there's a guy called Charlie Livermore, and he's the official trainer for Empire State Ride, and he put a program together, and I followed that, and it was like sometimes a mix of indoor riding or outdoor, just depending on the circumstances of the day, because I didn't want to miss training. I wanted to like take it seriously, and so sometimes, if weather was so atrocious, I would translate that into what is it, indoor training ride. And completed it, did fine. There were some interesting challenges along the way. But then last year, I took everything I learned in 2021 from the actual ride, and then I hired a trainer who was a former professional cyclist. And she put me on a program that incorporated like cross-training type stuff, like I was talking about, like cycling, strength, stretching. And when I went into that ride, again, okay, so we were riding since we were little, right? And you're shown how to ride to an extent, right? So that you could stay upright and enjoy it. But there's no like formal cycling training class. So I didn't really know how to shift gears or do anything technical on a bike because it was one of those things where you have a bike, you figure out how to use your bike, and that's it. Well, it's kind of wild at this point in my life, this many years. She taught me how to properly change gears to like the benefit of myself and my ride and getting stronger. And last year when I did the ride, it was like game changer. It was so enjoyable physically, mentally. I started and finished really strong, and it was amazing.
Wow. And so, as an example, in both years, you sort of had some sort of training plan, but with the approach that was taken from that coach that you had that helped you really zoom and focus in on the technique that needed for the cycling, did that help prepare you more for the endurance aspect of the event itself?
Absolutely, because, okay, so when I followed Charlie's plan, it was great because it was obviously developed specifically for that ride. But I had no idea what the terrain was like. I didn't know the route. I didn't know the terrain. I didn't know what it would be like to ride those number of miles in consecutive days. It's so different, the consecutive days factor versus the leisurely, whenever you want to do 50 today, 30 in a week, 100 in 2 weeks. So to be able to take knowledge of the terrain, even though the route changes slightly every year, and apply it to the training program that woman put together for me, it was like life-changing, you know?
You mentioned just briefly there, that first ride you went in totally blind, so you didn't know the terrain or the route. Sorry, this is, for the benefit of our listeners, my mind's almost making like the emoji of the exploded brain noise, because for me, personally with cycling, and sometimes I'm called the factician, where I want to know what climbs are on this route, how long are these climbs, what's the maximum gradient going to be, how long am I going to be suffering for, those sort of things. You did you choose not to know what was ahead of you, or how did that occur?
That is an excellent question, and I think it's a case-by-case basis with individual people, but so they give you the route ahead of time, of course, like, and you know the average miles per day, and factors change, like a road could be closed that you didn't expect. That's why they always put it in terms of like 100-ish miles today, like 88-ish miles the next day. So I was well aware of the route, but from a geography standpoint, let's say, but I didn't want to know the conditions because I knew myself, and I didn't want to start to go down that mental spiral where I was like, oh my God, I know that it's going to be killer terrain on day 3, and I don't know how I'm going to do that. That's going to stink, blah, 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 blah. I just didn't want to go there. So for me, a little bit of ignorance is bliss. And I educated myself enough, but not so much that I would allow advanced mental interference.
I love that. It resonates because I know about that internal mental interference. almost like you know enough to scare yourself, to talk yourself out of doing something, or to just maybe not put you in the right frame of mind to tackle what it is that you're out to do in the first place. So you just chose, I'll know the distance, but I don't want to know anymore.
Exactly. And you know what? Because it was an organized ride, right? There is that element of faith. Like, I can't go so far off. They've got my back to an extent of having the route per day marked. So there's a little bit of that as a, let's say, like a safety net in your mind that allows you to not have to worry so much about, you know, the preciseness of each day.
So then fast forward to lining up to do the event again last year. Is the route on the same course? And then did you, having the experience of the first event that you rode, how did that change your approach to doing it the second time round?
So the route is pretty much the same because at some points it has to be, right? Like there's only a certain way to take for segments of it. But I have to say, Terry Bourgeois, the organizer of ESR, the founder, he tries to mix it up because it does become like a family type thing where you really get connected with the event, and there's people that have done it nonstop year after year. And so I think to make it challenging and interesting for them, he's very mindful about trying to add, like, you know, changes in the segments as best he can and still keep things safe and on track. I kind of knew what I was getting into along the way at some points, and then some things were like surprises, like, oh, this section is hilly and it's not a designated hilly day. Like, how am I going to tackle this one? Or, you know,
or the worst surprise for a cyclist is you wake up and it's like a perpetual headwind. I think wind is like the worst of weather personally anyway. And so this was meant to be a really nice, easy section, But I've got the wind in my face as a favour all day. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't breathe and I'm looking back behind me because I'm trying to be able to breathe without the wind in my face.
It's always actually just on windy days. I always find it amazing where you turn a corner after being in a ferocious headwind and all of a sudden you can hear again because you don't have the wind in your ears. And it's like, oh, wow, I can hear the world.
Yeah, and you never even realized that it was as muffled as it was.
Exactly. So, 7 days in a row of big distances, what was the sort of toll that was taken across those 7 days?
Well, the first day I call it the honeymoon day. You're so pumped to get started and it's like day 1, everything's fresh. You're like well rested or as well rested as you can be. So like you go out of the gate just super pumped and probably a little bit to your detriment. You totally forget about any kind of pacing at all because your enthusiasm has your adrenaline going. And that day seems to fly by. Day 2, it gets like a little tougher. The day 1 is the least mileage of all the 7 days, of course, for obvious reasons, like to ease you into it. So the next day is longer. Day 3 is typically the hills. So you're like, okay, my legs better bring it. That's where a lot of mental fortitude comes into play that day. Day 4 is kind of like that same mentality. It's like kind of a neutral mentality. Day 5 is the hardest. That's the tricky one. So you lost, and it's not in terms of like physical. That's more, I would say, when the mental kicks in. It's not the enthusiasm from the start, and it's not the enthusiasm of the end, right? You're kind of stuck in that middle
Twilight zone.
Yeah. And it's where being part of a team really comes into play because it's long stretches, lots of miles, lots of hours. It's basically when you're putting in almost 8 hours a day, right? That's like a job at that point. Like your job is completing that day for the goal of ESR. And to stay on track mentally and not drift on those long stretches for hours, your team is crucial for like humor, drafting lines, and all sorts of aspects. Day 6, you're kind of the same as day 5, but you know that last day is coming. And that's when you mentally start to change to be sad. You're like, oh, I can't. In the beginning, pumped, right? Midway, oh, I can't wait for this to be over. Am I going to make it to the end? Oh, I can't wait. Day 6, oh my God, how did this go by so fast? I'm so sad. I don't want this to be over. I'm having so much fun. It's really wild, the kind of like phases your brain goes through until you hit day 7 and you're like back to that day 1 of joy. Like, I can't wait. I'm going to finish it, get to the end. You're going to see that crowd of people who you did the ride for, the survivors, the ones representing family members who lost family members. It's like unbelievable. I almost spend that whole last 5 miles crying because it's so emotionally overwhelming for like a multitude of reasons. And, that sadness creeps in that it is indeed the last day and that journey has come to an end.
I guess the physical journey of that particular ride comes to an end, but just the way that you recount those stories there's definitely experiences that you've taken on that ride that I know it's cliche, stay with you forever, but probably inform what you do and how you approach things in other challenges in your life since that as well.
Absolutely. And there's so many surprises you don't expect along the way. Like, for instance, at one portion of the ride, there were handmade signs by kids that they had posted in the ground that they were like, you've got this, you can do this. Like, just unbelievable. It's hard to, like, not get distracted in the best way,
It really gives you a lift when things like that happen. And the only experience I've had of something similar is I live in France and I'm been fortunate enough to cycle some of the climbs of the Tour de France on the stage of the Tour de France is going there, which means that there's a crowd roadside. Now, there are times when you're cycling and maybe you're not feeling your best where you don't necessarily want a crowd, but the lift that random strangers give to you when they shout and encourage you along, it's almost like, oh, wow, I have this extra energy I didn't know I had. And it really, that power of encouragement that gives you that boost to keep going, it's amazing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's pure magic, like in the truest sense. That last day, it's a lot of riding through like more so like neighborhood sections, and like strangers who know of the event because it's promoted all over the news will come out of their homes into their driveways with signs, no signs, just cheering for you. People put coolers by their mailboxes at the end of the road saying like, take one, thank you for doing what you're doing. It just like blows you away in the most heart exploding way.
Yeah, it's like you've got a cheer squad of strangers all along the route.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Sounds really, really special. So what was the hardest moment of the ride then? Is that day 5 where you're in that twilight zone of you're not happy, you're not sad, fatigue starting to build?
Yeah, I think it's day 5. Personally, that's what it is for me. As far as the ride itself goes, it's really, because of course, day after day, right, you're getting more exhausted. Your body is not necessarily used to doing, again, the consecutive. When you're training and you hold a full-time job, you do a bulk of your training on the weekends, some on the weekdays at night. But until you're in that moment, that's when it really starts to take effect on you. And the exhaustion mentally, physically, day 5 is when it really hits you accumulatively and is rough.
But somehow our bodies can wake up on day 6 and keep going.
Absolutely. It's like a reset. Like you wake up, and also I think the power of camaraderie, right? So every morning we started off together, it's fully supported but intense. You sleep intense. You have the option to stay in a hotel if you want, but the hotel is your cost. So of course, if you're trying to do a week's worth of this ride, camaraderie is really a key factor. So when you wake up in the morning, you all go to breakfast together. That first meal of the day is so crucial for energy, and you just kind of energize each other for the day, right? You're like, hey, you ready? All right, we got this. Let's do this. And you carry that with you throughout the day, that energy.
It's almost actually, it's a similar energy we were talking about earlier in the show, like the energy from the camaraderie of the participants in the Spartan challenge as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent point. It's that same aspect. And it's nice. It was really cool too, to your exact point. So you're with a team, right? And you're riding along the way, and you have so many hours to complete each day. But of course, you're all paced out differently, for a variety of reasons. But it's so cool when another team goes by you and they're like, yeah, you guys got this, like air high fives, and they're not even your team. Like, how cool is that? And then you pay it forward doing that to other teams when you go by them because it just inspires you. It's really cool.
If there was something like a virtual mood lifting meter, it would be off the scale when that happens, no doubt, for sure. So, Kimberly, fast forward now, you had that experience with the cycling event, but I'm also wondering, you're a cycling coach now as well, aren't you?
Yeah, so before I got involved in ESR, I was going to this place called Neutral, which is like a boutique studio in the community, and I love community vibes. I don't like big, franchises. So places like that are very special to me. I was going all the time, and the owner's she's a great woman, Liz Campen. She was like, you're here all the time. She's like, why don't you train and get certified to be an instructor? She's like, the community, the rides. She's like, I believe in you and your ability. And she was just so encouraging. She supported me going after my certification, and I did it because of her.
Wow, that's fantastic. And now you're a certified instructor.
Yes, and I'm a certified Schwinn instructor, trying to pay it back to her at her studio for how much she supported me. They were incredible. one of the biggest challenges during COVID is fundraising, right? It's hard enough to fundraise under normal circumstances when you're trying to get $3,000 to $5,000+ for a charity. Throw COVID into that, throw recession-like environment into that. It's beyond challenging. So I was very grateful for she hosted a ESR ride to support me, and she led it for free, donated her coaching for the class, and then all the money raised for that class went towards my team and the ride for me.
Oh, wow, that's extremely generous and supportive at the same time as well. And now you have this new opportunity and way forward with your cycle coaching too.
Yeah.
Just a question that's come to mind now off that. Do you ever come across people that you're coaching and you're cycling that remind you of yourself when you were first starting out?
That's a beautiful question. I would say yes, I could see that in some people, and I'm always I try to start the class reminding people because, of course you have some regulars and you have new people, and I always want to tell them this is your ride, this is your yoga class, whatever it is. You're here for you to get out of it what you want. I encourage people to always push themselves outside their comfort level, because that's the only way I feel in life we know what we're capable of, but in a comfortable, reasonable way. So if you're new to cycling, just take some of the elements that I'm teaching, guiding you through the class, focus on your posture and your breath, and then layer that on class after class, building up that strength in different ways.
Similar to your experience with your coach that helped you on the second stage or the second year of that ESR ride, where you were focusing on techniques that you didn't realize what an impact just having the right technique makes, and how much it changes your experience of riding as well in a positive way. That's great.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun to be able to take lessons I learned from her, real life lessons from ESR, and come back again to your point. I had never really thought of that till you just said it, and that's what I share just organically with people that come to class without even realizing it.
Well, it sort of ties actually in really well with my next question, which is more about your Girl on the Go podcast, because your podcast, the mission statement of your podcast, for lack of a better word of explaining it, is targeted at empowering and inspiring women through stories about empowering and inspiring women themselves. So how did that come to be? What led you to choose that topic?
I think it comes back to what we were saying with not feeling like I had a lot of women to look up to. And it's one thing to have teams, right? You could say oh, I love that girls team for, a sport like soccer or baseball or whatever. But there's not really many individual players or women that I had to be able to turn to. So that's where I think Gal on the Go's mission kind of went towards, creating a community of women that other women could look up to, and that raw, real factor, feeling like it's tangible versus a celebrity or someone else that, you feel I can do it, but they're such and such, so maybe I can't really do what they're doing.
Your show is all about highlighting what's possible and removing those sort of perceived barriers, because it is highlighting stories of things that are done by just ourselves, what we would normally class as just everyday normal human beings.
Exactly.
So for our listeners then, if they want to find out more about you and your show, where can they find about you online, Kimberly?
Okay, well, if you would like to check out my website, you can go to www.galotgo.com. That is my short form of Gal on the Go.
Super.
And if you want to connect with me on Instagram, you could go to @gal_on_go. Or also, if you would like to check out, I'd be grateful, my podcast on Instagram, it's @galonthego_unplugged.
Ah, fantastic. And for all our listeners, I will provide links to all those resources for Kimberly in our show notes as well. Kimberly, I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours, but I do have just 2 quick fire questions to finish the show off. Again, this is something that I ask all my guests, sort of cycling related. The first one is, if you were given the choice, would you rather ride for 4 hours on your own or go on a social ride with other people for 4 hours?
Okay, so this is going to be an answer, not answer. Because
okay, a qualified answer.
So, I'd rather ride 4 hours on my own because of the fact that, it goes back to that growing up an only child and getting on my bike and riding for that de-stressing factor and that sense of freedom. And to this day, after work on weekends, I still enjoy riding for decompressing aspects and getting lost in the ride and just taking in and exploring my surroundings, because that's really where I find connection and peace. But
I was waiting for the but.
Dun, dun, dun. When it comes to things like an ESR or like an organized ride, nothing beats camaraderie of teammates over multiple days. There's just like such a joy and a bond that comes with that.
I think I can accept both answers to that question and you sitting on the fence. I think they were both very, very good ones. So lastly, and we talked about this a little bit during the show, but do you prefer climbing mountains or cycling into headwinds?
Okay, this is an excellent question. So I would have thought headwinds, but I think climbing mountains, because you feel alive, right? Like when you could tackle a mountain, you adjust your body physically, you adjust your gears, like the mountain's kind of like, come on now, I'm going to challenge you. What do you got? And you could push back with like the physicality and the gear changing. Whereas headwinds, it's like, all right, literally, I'm in your face. So you gotta hunker down and just fight to not get flipped over or pushed out into the road. So I think mountains.
Definitely. I mean, personally, I feel like sometimes there's headwinds which I just feel like a perpetually non-ending climb, whereas at least on a climb, even if it's really steep and challenging, I know where the summit is. Whereas with a headwind, it just feels like some days it will just never end. And I never feel like I ever get the benefit of having an equal time in a tailwind either. But look, that's just part of cycling. It all makes us feel alive. It helps us to go out to places and feel free and see what we're capable of as well. Kimberly, it has been an absolute pleasure to share and listen to your story today. I've really felt encouraged and empowered just hearing what you've done and what you've achieved. I'll certainly be watching out for more of you and seeing what's up next in your story. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Bella. You're an amazing host, and I've had a blast. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review. It really helps the podcast to grow and reach a wider audience. Also, feel free to share it with others and post about it on your social media. Lastly, do you have your own story you'd like to share with us? Then please get in touch by sending an email to podcast@seektravelride.com and request to be featured as a guest on the show. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.